Sea of Thieves is a game that has had quite the journey from its launch to where it currently sits today. On March 20, 2018, the world was delivered a game that would allow them to sail the seas and live out their pirate fantasies. In an industry that for some reason was severely lacking in pirate-themed video games, it looked like Sea of Thieves was poised to fill the gap in the market and excel beyond developer Rare's wildest dreams. But then the game came out and yeah, it didn't really do that. But 6 years has passed. It's now 2024, and given that I heard that Sea of Thieves was going to be dropping on PS5, I figured, what better time to dive back into the seas and see for myself what this game has to offer. If it finally lives up to its promises after all this time. If it is the ultimate pirate fantasy. Well, in this deep dive retrospective, we're going to dive headfirst into Sea of Thieves and see exactly what it has to offer. Everything from its launch, the comeback, the gameplay, the open world, and much more, and find out for ourselves if Sea of Thieves in 2024 is the game that it was always supposed to be. Now, I've actually been streaming Sea of Thieves recently over on my Twitch channel, which is something that I'm going to be doing for all my upcoming videos. So if you want to see how these videos come together in real time, head on over, drop a follow. I think you'll enjoy it. But with that out of the way, Sea of Thieves in 2024. Let's dive into it. You know, I still remember when Sea of Thieves launched back in 2018. As a massive Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Pirates of the Caribbean fan, I didn't exactly need a lot of convincing to check the game out. After all, the trailers looked great, the game looked fun, the visual style was cartoonish, yet visually beautiful. You could get a group of friends together, sail the seas, hop from island to island, dig up treasure, fight off skeletons, the Kraken, and more importantly, other pirates. It just seemed like the perfect pirate fantasy, and for many people, it was, for about 3 hours. Because there was only so many times that you could sail to an island, kill a bunch of skeletons, dig up a treasure chest before it starts to get repetitive. The game also didn't hold your hand. It was definitely leaning into the idea of going out there and seeing what the world has in store for you. But quite often, you'd just be standing on your ship with your mates and just sitting there wondering, well, what now? And the thing is, there just wasn't really anything to do at all. You see, Sea of Thieves' biggest problem wasn't that it was a bad game. Far from it, in fact. The problem was, after the novelty of the world and its concept wore off, there was just nothing to do. The idea of going on a ship and making your own fun is cool in concept, but in execution, the game simply didn't have enough content to allow that concept to flourish, leading to many disappointed players who basically summed Sea of Thieves up in one word: boring. But despite clearly pushing the game out before it was ready, Rare weren't just going to roll over and let the game die. They got to work, and man, it was quite the journey. Over the past 6 years, Rare have been hard at work turning Sea of Thieves into the game that it was always supposed to be. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and advocate for the release it now, fix it later mentality that Sea of Thieves fell victim to, as that mindset is a plague on the gaming industry, no matter what way you cut it. But ignoring that issue for a second, it's truly mind-blowing the comeback this game actually pulled off. When we think of some of the biggest video game comebacks of all time, we think of No Man's Sky, Battlefront 2, but Sea of Thieves deserves its place right alongside them. Now, for context for this video, I've played Sea of Thieves in 3 different blocks across the past 6 years. I played it for a week when it first came out in 2018. I then played the game again in the first COVID lockdown in 2020, and I actually played a lot in that time. And fast forward to 2024, I've started to play the game once again. And there's no doubt that Sea of Thieves right now is in the best state it's ever been. Sure, there's the same old issues like hit reg not working, various other glitches as well, but Sea of Thieves right now is basically unrecognizable from its launch counterpart. The map has expanded, the enemy variety has drastically increased, and I don't say that lightly. The enemy variety in Sea of Thieves is like 20 times what it was at launch. They've also added an emissary system, which allows you to align with trading companies to go after certain types of loot and earn extra rewards for the work you put in. You've got Gold Hoarders, Order of Souls, Merchant Alliance, Athena's Fortune, and Reaper's Bones. Each of them favor different playstyles. Reaper's Bones is the PvP emissary, and the rest are more PvE focused, but there's no limitations on what you can do. They've also added a huge amount of quests and tool tales to engage in. Some of them are pretty fun, which leads you to engage in puzzles and also a semi-cohesive story and a bit of a reward at the end. Now, apart from the Pirates of the Caribbean tall tale, these have been pretty hit and miss for me, it must be said, but definitely can be fun with your friends. Throughout these updates over the past 6 years, the way players play the game has also evolved. The additions of larger forts and more valuable loot has led to many players taking the pirate side of the game more seriously and letting others do the work for them to take it for themselves. This led to a massive phase of players tucking on enemy ships, which is probably my favorite thing to do in Sea of Thieves. Tucking on an enemy ship, listening to their hot mics, all whilst they have no idea that you're there. It's a unique experience this game offers that I absolutely love, and it was great that the developers embraced this mechanic. Now, in a recent update, Rare have changed the way we play the game once again, adding new weapons, new harpoon mechanics. You can also fast travel through your quest table or hop servers. The way this game continues to evolve is honestly really impressive. Now, a major part of Sea of Thieves and the enjoyment that you can have with it can heavily rely on who you play the game with. Playing the game solo is a pretty daunting task for a new player, but if you can play with friends, you can have a lot of fun just goofing around. I've actually met a lot of really close friends through this game over the past few years, and up until this day, I'm still meeting awesome people, and jumping on ships and goofing around with them is so much fun. Except for this doofus.
Yeah, all my homies in the crib.
But for real, go follow It's White and Lady Valiant over on Twitch. They're amazing Sea of Thieves creators and help me get some of the clips for this video. Plus, they're just awesome people. So it's moments like these, playing with friends, just goofing around, where I enjoy Sea of Thieves the most. Friends can really be the thing that elevates Sea of Thieves from a good game to a great game. So don't neglect playing this game with friends and just doing it solo, because you'll be leaving out the best part of Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves in 2024, it's a bit of a gem that deserves more attention. I think that's clear. Jumping into the game today, I have no doubt in my mind that they've pretty much done it. They've made the pirate game that we all wanted. But let's dive into the specifics of what makes Sea of Thieves such a great game in 2024. Six years on from the game's release, the open world of Sea of Thieves is still the star of the show. The freedom to just load into a server, get on your ship, and see what happens is one of the best parts about the open world of this game. You don't always necessarily need a heading. You don't necessarily have a goal in mind. If you're like me and prefer PvP, you can just sail out into the ocean and see what happens. And it's the spontaneous events of this open world that make it so much fun to explore. When the game launched, the make your own fun idea was what the game was built around. But now that there are actually things to see and do in this world, that idea actually works. I often just load into a server and just take in the immersive atmosphere that the game provides. It's a very lonely open world, and that's part of the charm. But things can go quickly from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. Just the other day, I was out on a leisurely cruise on my ship and I saw a bluish green haze over the water. And as someone who rarely explores things like this, I decided to dive to the bottom of the ocean to see what it was all about. After that, I swam to the surface to hear enemy player hot mics, and my ship was nowhere to be seen. So I jumped aboard their ship and I had to kill them about 20 times and used firebombs to damage their ship enough to sink them. Needless to say, they weren't very happy about it.
No!
The point I'm trying to make here is, what was a leisurely sail around the seas turned into a high-stakes fight with 2 other players, and if I died, it was over. I didn't have a ship to go back to. I had to kill them both over and over again, or the engagement was over. It got my heart rate going, something that rarely happens in any multiplayer game for me these days. And this is a random encounter that I couldn't have predicted, but it's an encounter that I won't forget. That's the magic of Sea of Thieves right there. Now, sometimes you'll engage in a fight with an enemy ship and it can just attract the entire server. And before you know it, your 1v1 ship battle has turned into an all-out server warfare. And it's random moments like these where Sea of Thieves flourishes. The moments that you can't necessarily force. Now, you can engage in quests and tall tales and the likes for some PvE adventures, but in my opinion, that's not where the value of this game lies. Hopping on with your mates, chatting some shit, and engaging in massive battles with enemy players and trying to keep your ship afloat amidst the chaos is where I find the most enjoyment. Now, you can go and actively search for PvP or PvE events if you want to, especially these days with new features that allow you to essentially fast travel and switch servers, as well as actively seeking out PvP specifically. So there is definitely more choice in this sandbox than there was at launch, specifically when it comes to finding enemies across the world. So in a way, the world events aren't as random as they used to be. But a major part of what makes this game so great is the freedom that you have. So you can choose to actively seek combat out if you want to, or you can, as I said, just go out into the world with no goal in mind and see what happens. Now, littered throughout the world are various forts, outposts, random islands, ghost ship fleets, skeleton ships, the Kraken, megalodons, mermaids, sharks, other players. There's simply just so many ways that your experience can evolve into something you never predicted. When the game launched, things were pretty bare bones, but in terms of PvE events, this world right now is totally full of them. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like all of these activities are must-do activities. Maybe you do them once or twice, but after that, there's not really enough in these events to justify your time. There's only so many times you can do a fort or a ghost fleet, at least in my opinion, before it gets boring. I'd much rather work for that loot by killing enemy players, letting them do the work for me. Loot won in battle is 10 times sweeter than loot earned engaging in PvE, as far as I'm concerned. Now look, for some people, the open world of Sea of Thieves, they still might find it boring, much like many people did when the game launched, because it is a game that requires patience. You can jump on some days and nothing happens, unless you actively force it. But sometimes you can jump on and the server is just jam-packed with things to do and engagements to be had. And it's not knowing what's around the corner that makes this game so unique. So if you found the game boring back when it launched, there's still a chance you still might find it boring in 2024, but you have options. I would suggest sticking it out. Because when this game is firing on all cylinders in this massive and immersive open world, it is the ultimate pirate game that we wanted. The gameplay of Sea of Thieves has undergone fairly drastic changes since launch. Thinking of the game back when it first came out, the gameplay was so ridiculously simple that it definitely didn't help with the notion that the game was boring. But obviously here we are 6 years later and so much has changed over that course of time. But the basic bones and structure of the game itself haven't necessarily altered all that much. For example, as of right now, you can sail 3 ships: the sloop, the brigantine, and the galleon. The sloop being the smaller, nimbler 2-man ship, the brig being the fast 3-man ship, and the galleon being the big boy on the seas holding up to 4 players. Controlling all the ships feels great in accordance to the specific ship you're using. Now, the basic gameplay of the ships hasn't really changed all that much since launch. They control the same way. You catch wind in the sails to go faster, you've got your anchor and the cannons on either side. They haven't really had to change a whole lot for the ships in a gameplay sense. They did add harpoons quite a few years ago that allowed you to pull off sharper turns when closer to the shore or just get loot on your ship faster, which was a welcome addition, it must be said. And in the most recent update, it was made so you can actually walk along the harpoon to get to certain areas. This is a new game mechanic, and so is the addition of the wind horn, which allows you to catch the wind in your sails, blow enemies off your ship, put out fires, go faster on rowboats and underwater. So you get the idea. They're adding items to the game still that are going to spice up the gameplay in future quite a bit. And it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves over time, as that's a big part of the gameplay of Sea of Thieves. Rare will add a basic mechanic to the game, and players will find a way to form it into the new meta. Something that springs to mind immediately in a gameplay sense is the sword glitch. Players discovered not long after the game came out that for some reason you could hold the sword button down, and if you time it right, you can lunge absurd distances, making traversing the map faster, boarding ships easier, and adding a new way to fight enemies. Players then learned that if you blocked before you held the attack button down, you could then move before you lunge, making it even better. What was seemingly a glitch is now a mainstay mechanic to the sword gameplay. The sword gameplay in general though, it's kind of a mixed bag due to the game having pretty weird hit detection. But it is the option that gives players the most mobility. If you're not using the sword, the gameplay in Sea of Thieves in a combat sense can be very, very stiff. Movement isn't overly fluent, especially when you're on ships due to waves, jumping around, as well as server connection. So you can quite often find yourself getting stuck on nothing mid-battle, which is really damn frustrating. But if you do have the sword, a great help with that is using the dodge mechanic, which requires you to hold down block and jump in either direction. And it seems to be a mechanic that I see almost no players using. This is no doubt large in part due to the fact that Sea of Thieves just drops you in the sandbox and says, go have fun. It doesn't really teach you anything, so you don't really know stuff like this. Now, one of Sea of Thieves' biggest issues throughout its entire lifespan, and it's still an issue today, has been hit registration. Quite often you'll be fighting enemies and you'll shoot them with a sniper, which means theoretically they should be dead with 1 or 2 sword swings, but they just won't die. Because despite the game telling you that you've hit them, you didn't. So if you're going to jump into Sea of Thieves in 2024, be ready for the hit reg frustration. It's my biggest issue with this game's gameplay by far. Also, gunplay in general isn't overly fluent. Aiming down sights on the sniper and the blunderbuss is a little strange a lot of the time. The blunderbuss especially, sometimes you'll hold down aim and it just won't aim, or you'll hold down shoot and it just won't shoot. Now recently, a new throwing knife weapon option was added that seems to be fairly powerful in the right hands, as well as a shotgun pistol, but I wouldn't use that one unless you're doing PvE, to be perfectly honest. I don't think it's very good. There's also a bunch of throwable items in the game now with blunder bombs, fire bombs, and the bone cooler. All of these items added an extra layer onto the combat for better or worse. Now obviously a big part of the gameplay of Sea of Thieves is the naval warfare. Therefore, cannonballs are pretty damn important. Now cannonballs each serve their own unique purpose, and if you're accurate on the cannons, which I'm certainly not, as you've probably noticed by the gameplay at this point, it can turn the battle in your favor very quickly. Now, a major part of the gameplay is the ability to tuck on enemy ships like we spoke about earlier. If you want to be sneaky, finding your way onto an enemy ship and springing a surprise on an unsuspecting crew will never not be fun. You can also park ships far away from forts and swim or row over to tuck in a tower and wait for an unsuspecting crew to finish a fort for you to sweep in and take the loot for yourself. This is a whole other layer to the gameplay of Sea of Thieves that requires a lot of patience, but are a very satisfying part of the gameplay loop if you become a bit of a sweaty player. So if it hasn't become clear by now, Sea of Thieves in a gameplay sense has evolved a hell of a lot since launch, but the basic bones of the gameplay are still virtually identical to how it was at launch. And the gameplay is unique in the sense that you just need to play the game a lot and make a ton of mistakes in order to improve. There's no tips or tricks that'll turn you into an instant god. It's just time and the will to learn. But no matter how good you get, the flaws in the gameplay can become your undoing in a fight. You can hit someone with a sniper a couple times and they just won't die. Then they'll get a random blunderbuss shot on you from a distance and you'll die in one shot. Like, it doesn't make sense, but these things happen. So the gameplay element of Sea of Thieves is definitely a love-hate kind of deal. But when it works well, it becomes extremely enjoyable. And getting better and taking on an entire galleon crew in a 1v4 and coming out victorious is about as satisfying as playing a video game can get. Overall, the gameplay of Sea of Thieves is flawed, make no mistake, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. So to bring this one all together, Sea of Thieves in 2024. It's not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. It has flaws within the gameplay that can absolutely put a damper on your experience. But when the game works as intended, it is without question etching toward being the ultimate pirate fantasy. Rare have turned the game into something resembling the game that it always should have been. It's a shame that it took a bad launch and 6 years worth of updates to get there, but the fact of the matter is, it's there now. There's always been something about Sea of Thieves that has kept me coming back over the past 6 years, and right now I'm having so much fun getting up to no good in this incredibly immersive open world. Most of the magic of this game does come from your player versus player engagements and the interactions that they can cause. So if you were to jump into Sea of Thieves today, I'd say don't shy away from PvP. The PvE is great to get you in tune with the basic mechanics of the game, But once you get comfortable, start getting up to no good with other pirates. Overall, Sea of Thieves right now in 2024 is without a shadow of a doubt worth your time. Now, I just want to say a massive thank you for watching. Let me know what game you want me to cover next. Remember to follow us over on Instagram, Twitter, and of course Twitch, as we'll be streaming Sea of Thieves and various other games we visit on this channel over there. So make sure you drop a follow on all 3 of those socials, and thank you so much for watching.